Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we've got a fascinating stack of sources detailing a genuine international crisis from 1946.
And it's a crisis that's really rooted in objects defying physics, filling the skies over Scandinavia.
Right, so let's set the scene. It's immediately after World War II. Europe is, still in pieces. Cold War tensions are just ratcheting up.
And then suddenly, thousands of unidentified objects, missile-like things, start appearing over Sweden, Norway, Finland. They call them the ghost rockets.
An immediate national security nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. The scale was just staggering. We're talking about thousands of sightings logged by the Swedish military in just a few months. The panic was very, very real.
So our mission today is to really dig into the sources on the international investigation, and specifically the urgent high-level intervention by the United States.
One man in particular, Lieutenant General James Doolittle.
The Doolittle, the hero of the Doolittle raid.
The very same. And he gets placed right at the nexus of, well, the dawn of the nuclear age and the birth of the UFO phenomenon. We need to figure out why Washington sent its top air power expert to handle what looked like a regional mystery.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Before we get to Washington, what were people actually seeing?
Well, the reports really peaked around May 1946. And these weren't just, fuzzy lights.
Right.
People were giving detailed descriptions, usually fast-flying, rocket or missile-shaped objects, sometimes visible for just a few seconds.
But not always.
No, you also had these reports of slower-moving, cigar-shaped objects, often described as metallic, things that just defied an easy explanation.
And the key thing, right, is that their behavior immediately contradicted the most obvious theory.
Which was, of course, captured German V weapons.
Yeah, that the Soviets were test-firing them from Peenemünde.
Exactly. But if these were V1s or V2s, they should act like them. A V2 follows a predictable arc. It goes up, it comes down. Simple ballistics.
But the ghost rockets didn't.
Not at all. The investigators were getting this combination of flight characteristics that just made no sense. People reported them flying horizontally for long periods.
Horizontally?
Maneuvering, even flying in formation. And many reports, this is crucial, said they were silent and left no visible exhaust trail.
Which is impossible for a V2. That's a massive liquid-fueled rocket. You would see it and hear it for miles.
Precisely. So if you're an analyst in Stockholm in July 46, you know instantly this isn't a V weapon. The basic laws of physics for known technology are just being thrown out the window.
So that's why the whole Soviet theory, even though it was the easy answer, was dismissed pretty quickly by the professionals.
Right. The investigators in Sweden, Britain, and the U.S. knew it didn't fit. And beyond the physics problem, there was the huge lack of debris.
No fragments at all.
The Swedish military mounted these massive, expensive searches. They even used naval salvage teams to drag Lake Komjärv, where there was a really specific witness account of a crash.
And what did they find?
Nothing definitive. They consistently came up empty. They'd find what they called common slag or natural debris, but never a piece of a rocket.
So you have thousands of sightings, confirmed by military observers, even radar, but zero physical proof.
It's the ultimate paradox, and you can imagine that must have terrified Washington even more than the idea of Soviet tests.
Because it shifts the threat.
It shifts it from a known enemy with known weapons to completely unknown technology. And this is exactly when the U.S. links this mystery to the biggest issue of the day, the new atomic age.
Right, because that summer, June and July, the U.S. is conducting the Bikini atomic tests.
The whole world is focused on nuclear strategy, and General Doolittle is right there at the intersection.
He wasn't just watching the tests, he was thinking about what came next.
Exactly. When he came back from Bikini, he was very public about it. He told the Chicago Daily Tribune that he expected atomic-tipped missiles would be the weapon of the next war.
So he's already the go-to guy connecting rocketry and atomic weapons.
Which makes him the obvious choice when a mysterious missile crisis erupts in a neutral but strategically vital country like Sweden.
And this urgency immediately filters up to the highest levels of intelligence in Washington.
It does. On August 22nd, 1946, the director of the new Central Intelligence Group, the CIG, basically the precursor to the CIA,
General Hoyt
Vandenberg writes a top-secret memo to President Truman, and in it, he officially says the evidence points to Peenemünde.
So the official CIG line is the simple Soviet theory, even though the evidence on the ground doesn't fit.
It was, but our sources say that conclusion was, and this is a quote, perhaps based in part on information from Doolittle and Sarnoff.
So Doolittle's already in the loop, feeding information to the top.
Right. And while the CIG might have wanted that clean, simple answer, you have to think Doolittle was already dealing with something far less clean.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, because Doolittle goes from being an advisor in D.C. to being sent directly into the hot zone. What was the trigger?
The whole thing just reached a boiling point in mid-August. On August 11th, a massive swarm, as they called it, of these objects passed low over Stockholm.
Over the capital.
Over the capital. It caused a minor panic. The Swedish General Staff put the entire military on high alert. This wasn't just some rural sighting anymore. This was a direct incursion.
And Sweden, a neutral country, makes a huge public move.
They moved incredibly fast. The very next day, August 12th, the Swedish General Staff officially announces that Lieutenant General James Doolittle would be visiting to give advice.
Wow.
And they specifically say the tension had reached near the boiling point. Publicly calling for America's top general, I mean, that signals real desperation.
So Doolittle arrives, and he immediately plays it down, right? The classic intelligence move.
Textbook. He arrives around August 21st. Says he's just on a business trip, but, he's willing to place his knowledge and experience at their disposal.
And he didn't come alone.
No, he brought Brigadier General David Sarnoff,
The head of RCA, a world expert on radio and radar.
which tells you everything about the technical nature of this mission. Doolittle's the strategist, Sarnoff is the tech guy.
So what was the specific advice they gave the Swedes?
It was all about radar. Doolittle apparently expressed, surprise that they hadn't found any wreckage yet.
A bit of a pointed comment.
I think so. But the core message from both him and Sarnoff was that the Swedes needed to use the technology they had. Sarnoff basically said, look, in the war, we used radar to find the range, the height, and most importantly, the place from which the rockets are fired.
So stop looking for debris on the ground and start focusing on electronic tracking.
That's the mandate. Radar proves motion and control. It separates these objects from meteors or anything natural.
Doolittle spends days in meetings with the Swedish Air Force, goes over all their data, and then everything changes. We get the blackout.
The shift from total panic to total silence is immediate and, frankly, jarring. Right after Doolittle's meetings, the Swedish Defense Staff makes a huge announcement.
What was it?
They admit something they'd been holding back. They revealed that their radar had in fact registered the presence of bombs over the country.
Wait a second. So they had radar confirmation all along, but they only announce it after the American general comes and tells them to use radar.
It suggests a very high level of orchestration of the public story, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
And it gets better. A New York Times story from August 22nd explicitly states that certain new measures were discussed with Doolittle during his visit.
Certain new measures.
And what happens right after those measures are discussed? The news on the ghost rockets just, it all but disappears.
So the blackout was the new measure.
It seems very likely. Sweden had already brought in some censorship in July, banning specific locations. But after Doolittle left, it went from restricted reporting to almost no reporting at all. It strongly implies a high-level security protocol was put in place to shut the conversation down.
It's incredible. But the Swedish military never actually said, case closed, did they?
No, and that's the fascinating part. They eventually put out a statement saying about 80% of sightings were probably celestial phenomena, meteors.
Okay, but what about the other 20%?
For that 20%, the official conclusion remained deeply ambiguous. They explicitly stated these were objects with trajectories that could not be satisfactorily explained. So even decades later, the phenomenon was officially unsolved.
Which brings us to the really provocative claims about what Doolittle actually found. Because if his job was to shut down the story, what was he trying to hide?
Well, you have to look at what people started saying later. The researcher Jacques Vallée claimed in 1979 that Doolittle wasn't just there for general advice. He claimed Doolittle was sent specifically to investigate reports of a crashed ghost rocket.
A crash. That would change everything.
It suggests the whole high-level response was driven by the potential recovery of, non-terrestrial technology.
And the real kicker is that Doolittle's report from that mission
has never been declassified.
Still classified today.
That's correct. And if the answer was just Soviet V weapons, there's no reason for that level of sustained secrecy. Doolittle's actions, the blackout, the classified report, it all suggests he found something far more disturbing to U.S. national security.
So to sum this up, the ghost rockets were a genuine international crisis. They forced the world's most advanced militaries to deal with objects that simply defied their understanding of technology.
It was a strategic panic. We have a U.S. Air Force document from a couple years later admitting these sightings forced them to consider explanations beyond the scope of our present intelligence thinking. Doolittle was sent in not just to give advice, but maybe to enforce a narrative, to implement a security protocol that just ended the public discussion overnight.
And if you connect this to what was happening elsewhere, like in the Mediterranean,
It gets even more chilling. You have to look at the parallel Greek investigation. A physicist named Paul Santorini was leading it. He was looking into similar objects over Greece.
and what happened?
His investigation was ordered to stop right after he conferred with foreign officials who were almost certainly from the U.S. Defense Department.
And he said why later on.
He did. Santorini claimed that officials were afraid to admit publicly that they had encountered a superior technology against which, and this is his quote, "we have no possibility of defense."
So that brings us to the final thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Exactly. If high-level experts like General Doolittle concluded these objects were real, controlled, and potentially superior to anything we had, what was the actual content of those certain new measures he implemented to silence the discussion? And what does that decision tell us about the history of intelligence cover-ups?
Because if the solution required an immediate total media blackout, the answer must have been far more extraordinary than anyone was ever allowed to know. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.